Alrighty. Well, it has been officially 1 minute, so we'll go ahead and get started. If you guys have any questions or you want to enter anything into the Q&A or the chat, please feel free. We will have a little Q&A section at the end. I'm happy to answer any possible question you may have. Okay, so welcome to Rethinking the Audio Matrix. I'm Samantha Potter. I'm the install and commercial audio manager for Allen Heath here in the United States. That's why it's so early here. But today we're going to be, in this session at the very least, is focusing on the Hm64. So let's just jump right in. Alrighty, you always got to start with a glamour shot, because what's better than a glamour shot? Not much, not much. Okay, I like framing out and kind of defining just a little bit what the Hm64 is before I start diving into the specs and features and all the really fun stuff I like talking about. I want to frame it out just a little bit. So what is the Hm64? Well, it's a 12 by 12 up to a 64 by 64 matrix processor for audio distribution. It can also be a complex high resolution zone mixer. It can also be a central processor for really, really highly configurable areas. And it's great to be a hub for physical and or touch kind of interface controls. What AHM kind of isn't is it's not a video processor, and it's not really a standalone VoIP solution. And there are ways to incorporate the Hm64 in systems that involve both of these, but just as it stands, it is not a video processor or a VoIP solution. I always like to, again, frame that out for everybody. So with that in mind, what kind of helps set the Hm64 apart from other matrix processors that you may have used or seen or even heard of? Really big ones being we have a custom built kind of FPGA, and we lock that in at 96K of a sampling rate, and we can lock it in at a 0.7 milliseconds. And so we're able to kind of, FPGA is going to come up a lot during this session because it's such an important part of the Hm64. It helps keep everything powerful and flexible while keeping processing at a max and its latency and phase coherency at an optimum. What also sets the Hm64 apart is that there is nonstop audio during routing or mix changes. In fact, there's only a couple of things that you can do to the Hm64 to stop audio from flowing, but you can freely reroute things, assign them, use presets to trigger different events. You don't have to stop audio, upload a file, and then reconnect and have the audio flowing in. It's not necessary with us, so that's good. Another one is that we have automatic peripheral firmware matching. So whenever you plug in, if any of you guys are familiar with like our Avantis or the SQ series or the Q or the D-Live, when you plug in our IO or our IP controllers or these peripheral kind of devices, it does automatic firmware matching. So you know that when you plug it in, it's always going to work. You don't have to worry about, oh, is this IP controller up to date, or is this IO box going to work? It's that whole kind of plug and play sense. And you might hear that phrase again this session. But so that's really important. We also have hassle-free controller deployment. So you can completely program every single IP controller that you may need in a project without having the Hm64 in front of you or having any of the IP controllers. I've programmed entire venues before I've deployed anything. And then it's easy to just send it out and assign the IP addresses and you're good to go. There's also a really big idea of value and quality kind of being synonyms of each other. And you'll notice as we kind of step through this, you get a lot of horsepower for your buck, as it were. And it's extremely scalable. So, you can start with a very, very small project. If you recall from just a couple slides ago, I mentioned a 12 by 12 up to 64 by 64 processing matrix. So we can have a small local project being completely handled independently. And as that project grows, whether it be a house of worship or a retail center or a restaurant perhaps that's expanding, it can grow with it. There's no need to rip everything out and start over again. You can use that Hm64 and grow with the project. And we offer, 6+ different kinds of control, depending on if you like touch controls or that more tactile physical controls, or you want some automation or you want some third-party stuff. Like, we have lots of ways that you can control the AHM64 to kind of bend your will, to get what you need done, and maybe more importantly, to get what the client and what the end user needs at the end of the day. And another huge point is that we have uncompromised processing resources. So you don't have to play the allocation game where you're adding in blocks and you're kind of wondering, like, okay, well, how much percentage of this do I have left? Do I need to make sure I can't use a gate here, or I can't use this here because I don't want to add any more latency? Again, going right back to the FPGA, it's assumed that every process in the FPGA and in the HM64 is running at all times, whether we're actually using it or not, or we just have it bypassed. The math is still happening. The process is still happening. And so we can just go for it. We can program to our heart's content. We don't need to worry about whether we're going to be using up anything in the HM64. We want you to be able to program it exactly to your needs and not have to worry about anything. We don't want to stand in your way. Okay, so here it is again. I want to get just point out a couple little bits and pieces of the front and the back panel for you. So again, it's a 12 by 12 up to 64 by 64 processing matrix with what we call flexible architecture. So it is not open architecture in the way that you just like drag in blocks and you have to start from scratch every single time. We give you a starting point, it passes audio straight out of the box. But the reason it is more flexible is that, yes, the gate comes before the EQ and we don't let you change that, but we let you move everything else around it, so much so that you completely forget that it's not totally open architecture. So flexible architecture, that's another big keyword, is flexible. That'll come up a lot as well. And we have the ultra low latency, 0.7 milliseconds, a 96K core. And you can see down there at the bottom, we have these status LEDs that'll have your power indication, your sync, and another really big one is the signal light that has the chromatic meter, which if you've seen almost any of our consoles, you'll see that we've got those little chromatic meters that are everything you need to know in an entire meter, but it's in the size of a little LED. So very powerful, very helpful. Then here on the back, we've got our 12 by 12 analog IO. We have our everything IO port, that S-Link port, which is an intelligent port. So anything inside of the Allen Heath ecosystem, when you plug it into that S-Link port, the S-Link port says, oh, I know what this is, and can do sample rate conversions or picks the protocol within our ecosystem to make sure it's always matching. You can think of it as a catch-all. Like you can plug, any of our digital consoles in. You can plug it in any of our IO. Everything works with this intelligent port, the S-Link port. So we have 128 by 128 channels that we can send through there. And we also have an IO port for audio networking, which could be another 128 by 128. And then down there at the bottom right, we have our 2 by 2 local GPIO. And we've got our DC backup power supply, which of course can be running at the same time as the AC. So in case of power failure, we can switch over to DC. All right. This is kind of the big world map of the HM64 land. The engine's right there in the middle. And we'll talk about a world of control here in just a second, and then we will hit over on it. But I want to hit everything IO first. I see a Q&A question, so let me look at that first before we go too far. How does firmware matching really work? Say with different versions, what is the process here? So what happens is you plug it in and the mainframe, in this case, it would be the HM64, basically announces what firmware version it is and asks the peripheral that you're plugging in what its firmware version is. And whether it needs to be up or down, the mainframe, the HM64, will actually send out the up or the downgrade of the firmware every time you connect it to make sure it's always matched. That's how that works. So go there. Hopefully that answered it for you. Let me know if you need any more information on it. I'd be happy to expand a little bit. Okay, so let's hop back over here. So now we're going to hit everything IO first. All righty. Everything you see on this page here is part of the Allen Heath everything IO ecosystem. Whether you need 48K or you want the full-blown amazing 96K sample resolution, we've got different options. We have things, if you wanted 48 inputs, on a single one, but you also wanted MEs, we have an option for that. If you wanted completely modular ins and outs, we have the DX32, which is a fantastic option, especially if you want to mix and match things like AES and XLR and extra outputs and things like that. A really big one I'm seeing a lot in the install world is the DX012 down at the bottom right, where you can have, it's 12 outputs, 012, and you can swap them between being traditional analog XLR outputs or AES, depending on your needs. I'm sure many of you guys have probably seen lots of the Everything IO ecosystem. And if you want to see more stuff, there is a fantastic landing page on the Allen Heath website that I still to this day will go check. Sometimes it's as simple as clicking the item that you want to connect to, and it will populate all of the available IO options for you. When you have something as cool as that intelligent S-Link port, you get access to everything. So there's a little shot of that. And here's a little example of the HM64 kind of, you can plug in, as I said, any of our consoles from Q all the way up to D Live and connecting it and really kind of putting the HM64 between console or between console and a PA perhaps, or broadcast. There are lots of different options. And you can see it's pictured here with a Dante card actually in the audio networking port. But I like this slide a lot because it really demonstrates, this interoperability of just putting the HM64 in a system that already exists with Allen Heath, or you want to build an entire system with Allen Heath. The HM64 is a fantastic arm or a branch of that. And you'll see here in a little bit, even if it's not an Allen Heath ecosystem and you just want the Allen Heath audio quality, you can use that as well. It goes great wherever you need to drop it. Alrighty, so speaking of Dante cards, I'm gonna take a sip of coffee. Okay, speaking of Dante cards, so of course we have Dante, where you can have 64 by 64, and you can run it at 96 or 48. It's also AES 67 ready. This is the all install conference event, and the HM64 really, really shines in hybrid places or highly configurable areas. And Dante just fits in that with very well. So you can't be in the install space and not have Dante. But we also have Waves sound grid, and the same deal. It can run 64 by 64 at 96 or 48. Sometimes, sound grid is an excellent option for many different projects, or they want to do lots and lots of multi-tracking, or they want to have certain effects on board. The Waves card is a great way to do that. And coming soon, we'll be able to let you put that S-Link card that fits, and I think you can see I have my little SQ5 down here in the corner. It fits inside of the SQ. All of these cards actually are the SQ size cards that slide into the back of the HM64. But soon we'll be able to use the SQ S-Link card. And that means that we'll have 2 intelligent S-Link ports, which also means we can really drop the HM64 in the middle of whatever massive Allen Heath ecosystem we want to build. It's completely up to us. I'm very much looking forward to that. That's going to be a lot of fun. And part of my job is helping people design stuff with the HM64, helping them program. And I get very excited about little bits of stuff like this, like little nerdy things where it's like, oh, this will open up so much more. I'll get to help people with this. And oh yeah, now we can hook up a bunch of D-Lives here. I have far too much fun. So I make no apologies for it. So I've shown you kind of the Allen Heath specific IO, but we also make Dante specific IO for the Allen Heath ecosystem. And you can see here, and I really love that little video there. But essentially, we've got, let me start over here. On the right-hand side, we've got our DT168 and our DT164W. So whether you need a stage box drop or you have a wall mount that you want to put this in a very specific install, we have options for that. And so even if you had nothing else that was Allen Heath, you can drop the DT168 and the 164W in any system. And using something like our software DT preamp control, we can have D-Live preamps, the Allen Heath Pro Audio quality preamps and audio in our system without having, a console. Or even though I know that you will personally put the HM64 in every single project you spec, I know I can hear you saying that. But in case something comes up and you can't do that, or it's out of scope, or you just want to have really reliable, great audio quality. You can drop those with these DT168 and 164W. But then new over on the left-hand side is we've got these Dante Breakouts that we've just announced. And there's going to be some great sessions on this about all the Dante stuff, the breakouts, and so many other things that I'm looking forward to if you guys want even more information. But as a little kind of gloss over it, our Dante Breakouts, we've got the 02, which would be 0 ins and 2 outs. We have the DT20, which would be 2 ins and 0 outs. And then we have the DT22, which is going to be 2 ins and 2 outs. And depending on your need or what you'd like to do with them, these make great drops, little breakouts of Dante wherever you need them in a specific Allen Heath project, an integrated project, or this is the only Allen Heath item that may be in it. These are great options, whether you need to just have a distant mic plugged in someplace and you want to have it on the Dante network, or you want to run some lines up to an array via Dante, or you want to have this really discrete, great installation of just 2x2. That's another option with those Phoenix connectors. The whole idea being very secure, very discrete, and able to place it in places exactly where you need. Get those 2 ins and 2 outs over your Dante network easily. So, and who can forget our rack mounting kit there at the bottom. And I think I can get the little video to play again, so I should do that. You can have a single or dual mount there. So in case you needed to rack mount it, you didn't have the rubber feet on it, or you didn't want to surface mount it, but you needed to have it in a rack, we do have that option for you as well. Okay, so a little bit more on the scalability of the Hm64. So here I've got it shown again with the Dante card. It's just very apt for this market. So we can have the really big points I want you to kind of take away from this slide being that we can have up to 25 discrete IO locations, which is huge. That's a lot of classrooms. That's a lot of drops. That's a lot of areas to have audio access. And we can have up to 268 system ins and outs. And, we can process up to 64 of them. But with the use of things that we call tie lines, we can actually take in channels in a certain protocol or from a certain location, convert it and send it someplace else without using any of our 64 channels for processing. And tie lines are extremely powerful, and I don't think enough people use them. So, and I'll repeat that just because it's so important. So we can take in, perhaps through Dante, we can take in tons of channels through Dante, but maybe we don't want to use the Hm64 to process it. Maybe I just want to send them on their way to the next console, maybe the Avantis at front of house, or to another Hm64 on a different side of the campus. I can take that audio and use a tie line and pick it at the socket and send it on its way and not touch the 64 channels of processing within the Hm64. Very powerful. So this is great for things like single rooms all the way to really, really large distributed spaces. And we've got all of this great integration. That's kind of what install is all about, right? So I've mentioned all the Dante we've got the AES67 as well as SoundGrid, but we've also got that intelligent S-Link port and all of our protocols. But then we also have things like networkable GPIO, because sometimes there are projects where we don't need any GPIO, but then there are other projects where it's like, I suddenly need a ton of GPIO, and we have an option for that, and I'll show you guys that in just a moment. But we also have TCP/IP protocols for third-party integration, and I know there's a great session on that third-party integration during this conference this week, so be sure to check it out. I know I'll be there. And we've got Crestron, AMX, Kramer, and Extron drivers. Sometimes clients or end users really prefer using these, and sometimes they're just already installed, and so if you don't need to tear it out, sometimes you don't have to, you shouldn't have to. And so we wanted to be able to help supply and support those kinds of projects. So we've got those drivers available for anybody who needs them. We've also got custom control, which I'll get into in a moment, but again, it's all about integrating and making things as easy but flexible as possible. Alrighty, so this looks familiar, right? So we talked about everything IO. We kind of started dabbling into the world of control, and I want to hop over into that right now. So remember how I said there was 6+ types of control. Well, I'm going to click through these really quickly. And again, I'll kind of gloss over them, but there are some great sessions. I believe Val is doing one on the IP controllers, for instance, but let's hop into this. So first, we have System Manager, which is the actual software that you use to program and control the HM64 during programming or when you get it, or just for funsies. It's available for free to download. You guys could go to the Allen Heath website right now. It runs on Mac and PC. You could go and download it and play with it and have access to almost every single feature without having an HM64 sitting in front of you, which again, I'm sure you guys are already putting in your orders now, which thank you. Thank you for all of those orders. But if you wanted to just play with it and see how you kind of get around and how it functions and the programmability and how expansive it is, go download System Manager. Again, it's free. Just go play with it. That's I almost always give demos of the System Manager beyond the slides, but it's a really important piece of software. Then we've got Custom Control, which you guys may have heard of, maybe not. In essence, it is a bring your own device sort of scenario where we can create our own applications based on the specific needs of our end user or our client, whether that be very technical or as little technically as possible. You know, sometimes the name of the game is giving them exactly what they need and not 1 ounce more. And we can do that easily with Custom Control, especially in the world where people, you know, I have several of my own rectangles sitting nearby. Sometimes, you know, we all have them and it would be easy to scan a QR code. They can download the app and then they have control of their room at the drop of a hat. So there's that. Then we've got our IP controllers, which are going to be those tactile, like physical controls over the HM64, as well as Avantis or DLive, but specifically to this presentation, they're really powerful, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll get into that in just a second. We also have our Gpio. So we had the 2x2 Gpio on the unit itself, on the HM64, but we also have networkable Gpio if we need to do more distant drops, or we just wanted to have many more channels. Then we've got our level sensing, which is a way that we can trigger events to happen based on the level of an input or zone. So like, let's say, okay, here's one I've very apt I've programmed. So let's say we've got this Dante run line, and I want to have, I'm sending pink into the Dante and I'm listening for it back. I'm telling the HM to say, hey, I want you to listen for this pink coming from Dante. And if that were to be cut out, if the Dante were to, for some reason, get disconnected or the network goes down, I want you to trigger an entire change where all of the routing gets switched over to local analog in and out, so that it's seamless and we don't have to worry about connectivity or anything like that. It's like a great emergency handbrake, like, oops, something's wrong, like pull that up and switch everything over. That's a great way to do it. Another way to do level sensing or to use level sensing is based on, like, if the signal gets up too high, or somebody claps or drops the mic, heaven forbid. We want to trigger something to happen, want to change the preset, or maybe I want to trigger audio playback based on the level of a signal, or I want to send out an external command string, which is, I believe, what I'm showing here. I can say, hey, when this level gets above this threshold or drops below this threshold, I want to send out this command. That's another option. There are lots and lots of programmable options. I have done just mini master classes, like just sessions on talking about level sensing and programming and all the different ways you can kind of manipulate things. It's very fun. And then we have, as I've mentioned, this third-party control, where if you've already got those panels in the project, you don't have to rip them out if you don't want to. We can work with them. Okay, so let's jump a little bit into the IP controllers, and there's another great session all about the IP controllers, but just to give you guys an idea, little teasers to go make sure you attend that. Our IP controllers are TCP/IP controls, buttons, switches, motorized faders, twist and turn knobs, of ways that we can program to control different aspects in the HM64. If we look at the IP1, for instance, this fits into a single gang box. So essentially a light switch. It fits into a light switch. And it's a push and turn rotary. So we have two functions at any given moment. We can have the regular twist and turn, but then if we push it in, we can twist and turn and do something different as well. It is PoE compliant, so it runs on PoE, which is great. And like much of our control, we use TCP/IP to send that control data over. The good news is you can have up to 64 of these on an AHM. That is a lot of classroom drops. I see these a lot in smaller worship spaces, in classrooms, or in staff areas, or in restaurant areas where they definitely want some control. They love having the physical touch button. They don't necessarily want a touch screen, and this can just be that perfect little answer. And it comes in black or white. We're looking at the US variant, but it also comes in an EU and UK version as well. Then we've got the IP6, which is like the IP1, perhaps on steroids. Now we've got 6 push and turn rotary knobs, but then we also have 12 buttons across the top, one above the screen and one below it. And then we have 6 buttons across the bottom, which you can program to do any number of things, but a popular one is to have them be layers. So now we can have up to 6 layers of buttons. This can make for a great sidecar. I've helped a very dear friend of mine program one of these that actually sits at their front of house, and they have an Hm64 in the back of house, kind of controlling their PA hangs. And they're using an IP6 to make sure that they can have, when the president of the school goes up, they can have a wireless handheld, but they don't have to have an engineer or a tech there running the console. So that's an instance one. So again, PoE compliant, we can have to 6 layers. It's part of that automatic firmware matching. And we can have up to 16 of these on an AHM. And then we've got the big brother, this big one. This is the IP8. It's got 8 motorized faders on it. We still have 16 of those buttons up top, and we have 6 layers across the bottom. You don't have to use them as layers, but we could. And this one is PoE Plus compliant. So it needs a little extra juice. It does come with power, so no worries. But if you did want to use PoE, you'll have to keep that in mind. And you can have up to 16 of these, just like the IP6 on a system as well. All righty, so then we have the Gpio, which again, some of those projects, like you just need Gpio. I have built several things for fun. I see a lot of these used for like tally lights or certain gooseneck mics. They can actually do the contact closure, the Gpio. So when they actually push the button on the base of the gooseneck, it actually triggers something, probably a mute state, probably muting or unmuting a channel, but those kinds of situations. So we have the 2x2 locally on the HM, and then you can have this, which is an 8x8, and we can work 8 of these into a system. And I'm certainly not a mathematician, but that is a lot of Gpio. Lots of options. I think the really big point being you can make 8 completely separate drops, excuse me, 8 completely separate drops of Gpio wherever you may need them. Then we got this third-party control again. That's just a good looking starting point there. And here we've got this software version of control, the custom control, which I've talked a little bit about. And again, I've given between my mini master classes and my normal, like regular one-on-one sessions, which if you guys want a one-on-one session, you guys should be sure to book those. It's custom control, building our own app and giving the client or the end user exactly what they need. So here's a couple of great shots of the editor, which we use to build the application. And then on the kind of in the middle of the screen in the right hand pictured touchscreen is the actual app itself. So we may be building it and running it simultaneously. Excuse me. I have done programming or using things like where I may be changing something in the custom control editor while somebody is using the app, and I can make those changes and they can still be using it. Again, it's not this case of, hold on, everybody stop. Everything needs to shut down so I can upload this and we run it. So that we wanted to make it really easy and be able to go with the flow and change things on the fly. So you see we've got computers, you can use it on tablets, you can use it on phones. It runs on the Mac OS, Windows, Android, and iOS devices. So no limitations there. Whatever device they may have, whether it be their Galaxy phone or their iPhone, or it may be their PC at a kiosk or anything like that, we can use those and run with them. We can make that app, especially I like making branded apps that either look like they kind of go perfectly with the venue or they fit on the wall beautifully, or it looks like it belongs to the company that's using it. So it's not just this like atrocious thing on the wall that we can't change, or it's extremely difficult to change, we can make it beautiful with very little effort. So I've got a couple of examples here. So here's one of a video conferencing room where we can have video calls. We can send out different triggers for events, probably with external commands, things like that. We can adjust the level of the room. We can easily mute things, and all for the sake of, somebody should be able to walk up, which they absolutely could with this application, know exactly what they need and have it function. Beautiful. Then we've also got, here's a couple that I've built. Here's one for a bar or a restaurant area where they're allowed to pick the source, what they want to hear. So that could be a stage on the other side of the wall. It could be a Tunes computer. It could be somebody's Bluetooth device, or a CD player for those of the restaurants that still have them. And they can very easily say, I want more volume or I want down. On the last one, we saw a fader. On this one, we have designed them to just be buttons that have a maximum or minimum value to give them some control. But again, especially in these kinds of areas, they're going to be busy. We want them to be able to easily just go over and touch and have things happen exactly as we need them to without making it hard for them. We've also got one at a theater here I am at called the Vox Theater. And they needed something for their event manager. And she wanted to be able to walk between different spaces and control everything. But we didn't want to give her we didn't want her to have to carry around a computer and be messing with System Manager, which is extremely powerful. And she may, put down the computer and a kid walks up and touches something. We don't want that. But we wanted to give her something really nice to use. So when she has her iPad or she has her phone, she can walk around and say, yes, I'm in the patio area and I want to listen to these 3 things. Or I'm in the main area and I need to have more Sonos, which is their music system, and things like that. Again, branded, beautiful, like obvious, easy to use. That's what custom control's for. Here's one in an auditorium where they just want to be able to have, again, just mute the room, pick a couple of wireless mics up, or use somebody's phone input or their Tunes PC and have that go up, or adjust the level of the whole room easily. And this, perhaps instead of this photo in the back, it's an actual photo of the auditorium, just like I did with my Vox one. That's their logo. These are their colors, and that is their stage that I used to program this. So I've got that. Again, it's all in the name of usability. And if we make it beautiful along the way, then that's great. And because I don't think I've mentioned it, it's free. So you can go download, just like you're already downloading and playing with System Manager, you can go and download Custom Control Editor and the app, and you can go and build stuff. You can have little test versions of the application and play with it and see like, oh, it's a click and drag kind of scenario. But if you want to know more about Custom Control, or you want maybe a little demo of it, please book a one-on-one or view one of our other sessions. I love Custom Control and I love programming it and seeing how far I can push it. So another example here is of a friend of mine, is a systems engineer at the theater I was talking about earlier. And they use Smart to do things. And sometimes they change out the PAs, or they have different uses. Like sometimes Broadway shows come through, or just the school's president comes in and speaks. And we want to be able to quickly enable the generator, throw some pink, see where all the levels are at, making sure they're matched, and swap out where that pink is actually being sent to quickly do measurements. Very easy. Even has a little show tab, which is not selected. This is the Smart tab, of course. The show tab, where they can just keep a whole, I believe he just made a huge page of just all of the meters, so he can be always looking at something and seeing what's going on during the show. Very cool project. So I will show you this again. I'll take a sip of water. So the Hm64, again, it's 12 by 12 up to 64 by 64 processing matrix with flexible architecture. It has ultra low latency with a sample rate of 96K. We're using that kind of custom built FPGA core. Now, we've talked about all of these pieces that can interact with it, how we can connect stuff with it. I want to tell you a little bit more now about the sound management tools, like what is inside of the Hm64. Well, to start, we have 8 automatic mic mixing engines, so we can have up to 64 channels of automatic mic control. We have ambient noise compensation, which is great for places where the ambient noise changes, and we want to help compensate for that. So for instance, lobbies, eating areas, patios, narthexes, things like that, or even shopping areas where when there's large influxes of people, we want to be able to maybe, for instance, raise or lower the background music sound. So it always feels like it's at the same level. And then when they leave again, we don't want the background music to be blasting anymore. So we want it to automatically compensate for that and bring that back down. We also have priority ducking for things like paging, whether it be announcements or in emergencies. Sometimes having priority ducking is an excellent choice. And we actually have 2 priority inputs on every zone. So you can have one number 1 priority and a secondary priority as well. And on every input and zone, we have 8-band parametric. We have its own dynamics and delay. And as you may have gathered from the 64 and HM64, we have up to 64 zones, which we configure in mono or stereo. Plus, we have speaker processing with its own crossover filters, more delays, limiters, and parametric on each of those bands. And now we can finally talk about the 12 channels of optional AEC that we'll get. And Nicola has, I'm very excited to attend the session, has one just talking about kind of all this new stuff, and AEC is going to be one of those things. So be sure to check out that session as well. And as I've mentioned, the system manager is available on Mac and Windows. There's integrated stereo playback, so we may be able to trigger maybe a certain time of day or a certain time of week. I want a specific track to play, or maybe I want to do level based, like, hey, when this level drops below this, I want you to just start playing this track. And we have an event scheduler, so I can say, yeah, on Wednesdays at 4:50 p.m., I know there's always going to be a small group that meets in here, or we always have the same business meeting at, just around lunchtime on Thursdays. I can trigger that, so everything about, the HM64 nearly will change over at that time, so that by the time the end user or the client walks in, it's exactly as they need it to be. And that can include, by triggering the preset, maybe it changes what the custom control, what the iPad on the table looks like. So when they walk in, even the tablet is specifically just for them. There is no guessing or wondering. It's always right there, the exact access they need when they need it. I want to tell you guys a couple of projects, because sometimes, so I've given you all this information, all these goodies, but sometimes it's easy to help conceptualize or contextualize like where people are using these. So first project, and granted, most of these are in the US, that is where I'm based, but there is one that is not in the US. So, all right, so the first one is the First Christian Church in Kentucky. Big points being it's a really highly configurable space. It's actually a daycare during the week, plus dual worship spaces and 10 classrooms on the weekend. So talk about flexible and very configurable areas. They're using the HM64 as an audio processing hub. They wanted to have an IP1 in each classroom, so they could do source selection, pick what they wanted to listen to, and control the level of that in their room. And they're also using an IP8 for like a little 5-input mix console in one of their dual worship spaces. So they can still have some mixing, but again, they don't need to have an entire tech or engineer or whole console there. The next project is in Hamilton College, and this is New York. This was one that a good friend of mine did. It's a private college with their own theater. They get a lot of, they're very close to Broadway, so stuff just comes through. And it's actually in a third-party system. They love the HM64 so much that they wanted to implement it into a theater they already had built, because it just added so much flexibility and horsepower in it. So they're using the 64 for no engineer events. I've mentioned they had that IP6 at front of house, so that the president could walk up and control a wireless handheld or some music without needing to bring somebody in. They also built a custom control app for the PA control, do really easy tuning, and just confirm that things were functioning as they should be. Next up, in Orange County, California, the Brave Thinking Studio. So this is a very interesting project. I've had a lot of fun learning about it, and one of these days I'm going to get out there to see it, hopefully. Essentially, it's a broadcast studio. This is this person that you can actually see in the image here, she's a professional speaker, and she built this studio in her home. And so she's actually able to have local and remote staff going through this HM64, but really she's hosting 5,000 plus attendee virtual events. So tons of people attending. And the HM64 is handling all of the broadcast audio and the entire comm system for these productions. So they've got 8 Zoom room audio feeds. Plus they have local and remote staff comms that they're handling through the HM64. There's an IP6 on the desk next to the talent here, where she can do fold back and talk back controls, ding exactly who she needs to ding, adjust levels of anything. Like, she's got her own control, again, exactly as she needs it and nothing more. And they also have this really cool version, this rehearsal mode, where they can be actively streaming something through the HM64, pushing all the audio out, but then a little subsection of it goes into rehearsal mode where they can be rehearsing cues and hitting points or talking about certain things or troubleshooting something without affecting the live stream. Like, all around, very cool project. And the HM64 is right in the heart of that audio. Then we've got another church, Summit View Church, and this is in Vancouver. And so they had a full worship campus and a broadcasting suite. This happened to have been paired with 2 D Lives, but the HM64 is really going to be their processing hub, but also this console switcher. So they have 2 IP1s plus custom control so that their volunteers can have access to AV stuff without being tech savvy, because that happens. I think we've all been there, or setting up technology for people who are not extremely tech forward. And we want them to still have access without making it painful for them. It's also handling their PA, their in-house TV, and their overflow room as well. And they had told me that after they had set this up, some third-party issue was exploding someplace. And suddenly their PA got disconnected. And in the middle of the sermon, they used the HM64 to switch over and take the broadcast feed and pump it through the PA in the worship space, and nobody was the wiser. It was instantaneous. They could take care of it quickly, and they were able to fix the problem, boot things back up, and things were just fine. I think that's really, really powerful. And we've got this multi-purpose space in Norway. So it's a 400 cap music venue, but they also hold seminars, meetings, corporate events there, all sorts of stuff. And they happen to have paired it with a D-Live C3500. But the HM64 is really handling the audio distribution throughout the facility. They wanted to have different tiers of control based on, event managers or, certain end users or people who were just on staff. They wanted to give different tiers of control. And so, like, for instance, they had IP1 for level control in different zones, and they had a custom control app with different control levels based on who was logging in. So if, event manager logged in, they would see a completely different app than if, I don't know, waiter number 3 logged in, for instance. And they also had an IP8 for hands-on mixing, again, without an engineer, being able to have access, having those motorized faders without having to have an engineer present. Okay, so big takeaways here, because I know I've been talking for a little while, and I appreciate you guys sticking through. There's so much to dig into with HM64, but key takeaways: flexible architecture for really flexible configurations. The HM64 fits perfectly in those hybrid zones. We wanted to get customizable control to suit any need at the drop of a hat, whether they love touchscreens, they hate touchscreens, or you wanted to automate it. We have those options. We wanted to get going quickly. We wanted to integrate easily. You can pass audio straight out of the box. That's huge. And we wanted it to integrate easily into systems that either had lots of Allen Heath or, for some odd reason, didn't have very much Allen Heath. We wanted them to fit into both of those scenarios perfectly. And we have a 3-year warranty, which we announced just a couple months ago. 3-year warranty, big deal, really big key takeaway. So we come to the point now where we have in a Q&A. I already answered one, and it looks like another one popped in. So let me go in there. All right, can a D-Live service be connected to an HM64 without the need for a mix rack? No. So the mix rack in a D-Live system is really kind of the brains. That's where all the processing is happening. So the HM64 is not taking the place of a mix rack. They're pretty different, actually. They're used for very different purposes. But you can connect the HM64 to a mix rack if you wanted, but the HM64 will not take place of the mix rack. So at that, and I'll hang out here, sip a little water. If you guys have more questions, like, please hit me with them. Oh, got another one. All right. Do zones or channels give you, can you have 64 stereo zones? So, you can have 32 stereo zones, and it changes based on, like, if you have the speaker processing going, that may eat a zone, depending on how you have it set up. But zones, you can kind of think as output buses, because you can send zones to other zones. So that bus structure is there, but you can assign them to be outputs. So they're just called zones because it's very appropriate for the systems that they're installed in. So do zones channels, can you have 64 stereo zones? No, you can have 64 mono ones or 32 stereo zones. And then the second question, there is a password login config capability. So yes, you can, there is, with System Manager itself, you can log in, and there will be more updates coming next. Now that we are launching the AEC, there's going to be a new firmware coming out, and that means a new System Manager where you can have a login to System Manager specifically. And that's really the only place you can change where you would want to be able to change, like get into the nitty gritty and change the config of it. As far as when you start talking about custom control, which you can use to control lots of things inside of the HM64, that has very specific like password logins, and you have 32 users on the HM64 as compared to like 10 on D-Live or Ventus, because it's expected you're going to have more users. And so you can have those, say, you can have 32 different logins, like through custom control, to let them see something specific about the config or control and things like that. Hopefully that answered that question for you, Jim. But yeah, any other questions as they're popping in? I'm here. I love answering them. Oh, and it looks like we've got Nick here. Hello, Nick.
Hey, Samantha. Hi. Thank you for the presentation, by the way. I, for one, really enjoyed it. I do have a couple of questions coming in through our different channel, which I will ask you in a second. And also just a reminder that we have a number of other exciting sessions. Please check them out, check the full schedule out on the website and register for more sessions on AHM64, echo cancelling, IP controllers, Dante, and much more. And also, just to answer a couple of users, these sessions will be recorded, are being recorded actually, and will be made available at the end of the virtual conference to everyone who registered, and also through our website. So there's a question from Andrew Crawford in Australia. Can you use the SQ-MADI card in AHM64? You were actually asking about it the other day, Samantha, weren't you?
Yeah, I was, which is funny. Yes, so currently you cannot use the SQ-MADI card in AHM, but here's the little tricky part. The requests have started to roll in, and the more that people ask for it, between me and all of our other distributors, plus on the Allen Heath forums, if we're all going in there and saying, yeah, we'd love to have MADI, then we can absolutely develop that so that that SQ-MADI card does work with the HM64. So today, no, but soon, maybe.
That's right. As with any relatively new product, we have a long list of things that we'd like to do, and obviously listening to user feedback and demand from our customers and distribution partners. That's how we try and prioritize the list of things to do. So yeah, MADI is a possibility, as well as supporting the S-Link as an option card in the I/O port to have an extra S-Link port on the AHM. And actually, Samantha, a question that came in was whether you can use the S-Link, the built-in S-Link port, and a Dante card, for example, at the same time with AHM.
Yeah, absolutely. You can absolutely use those simultaneously. In the patch bay of System Manager, which you can go see, you can be throwing things in either direction, but you can absolutely be using them simultaneously. And that's a big point. That's a big reason why they're both on there, because sometimes you need, you want to connect a console, but you also want to use SoundGrid, or you also want to use Dante. Like, you want to use it simultaneously, so you can.
Another question that I got was about choosing between DLive and AHM64. So we know that DLive doesn't have to be a full control surface and rack. You can, for example, install a DM0 rack with Dante and other option cards to handle audio in a system. So how would you go about choosing between AHM and DLive? What specific advantages or benefits you have for one or the other?
Yeah, well, it would all depend on how you're going to use it. So the HM64 is really just shy of a console in the box. It is not a console in the box. It's just shy of that. For instance, there's not effects on the HM64. We don't have a reverb, at least today. We don't have any effects on it. So if you needed something to genuinely, or at least more traditionally, mix something, the DLive Mix Rack is going to be the best option for you. If your goal is to have a ton of different zones or a lot of different control over your audio, the HM64 is great for that, because it was built and programmed to be able to send many feeds to many different locations.
And I've got one last one. I think someone possibly playing around with a system manager and asking, what exactly is a source selector? You mentioned it a couple of times in your presentation. What does a source selector do?
Yeah, so a source selector is, they're on the zones if you're poking around. And basically it's a way to allow somebody to pick between a designated list of sources. So as an example, it may be a classroom and they only want to be able to listen to their Blu-ray player or the house music, or if this is a classroom in the worship area, the worship feed. And we can give them, an IP1 or custom control, and basically let them pick, like, I would like to listen to Blu-ray now, or I would like to listen to the Sanctuary feed now, or I want to listen to the house music feed now, and let them pick between those without kind of completely eliminating their options. We can still send we can circumvent that and send other audio to them, like an emergency page. We can give them control over, say, 3 inputs, but still have them say, okay, well, if there's an emergency, you're still going to hear it, and things like that. So really, when you hear source selector, it's truly a way to select a source that they want to listen to at a given moment.
Fantastic. Thank you, Samantha. I think we've covered all of the questions, and just let me share very briefly the schedule for the webinars.
Yes.
And just to point out that on top of the possibility of registering for all these sessions for the 3 days until Thursday, you can also book a one-to-one session. So if you want to, for example, discuss your project requirement or learn more about one of our products like AHM64 and talk directly to, say, Samantha in the US, or our team in the UK, or Allen Heath in Australia or other regions, please fill in the form with your availability, a bit more about what you'd like to discuss, and we'll get back to you and confirm an appointment. So that's also possible through the website. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys for hanging out, listening to me talk for a little while. And this is really, we went pretty far, but we can go even further into HM64 and really the possibilities with it. So if you are curious, go book that one-on-one session. Feel free to ask some questions or reach out to us. More than happy to talk about the HM64 for many hours. So. All right. Thank you, Samantha. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Yes. Thank you, guys. Bye.